you will have a very different government if you keep doing that enough. You're flirting with danger somewhere, unless there's some discipline in the process. But I don't regard Japan as in some terrible danger. They've done a huge amount of this and gotten by with it. I don't think we'll be as good at handling our problems as Japan is. In my whole adult life, I've never hoarded cash waiting for better conditions. I've just invested in the best thing I could find, and I don't think I'm going to change now. And the Daily Journal's used up its cash. Now, Berkshire has excess cash, quite a bit of excess cash. But it's not doing that because it thinks it knows how to time investments. It just can't find anything it can stand buying. So we don't have a solution to your problem. We're just coping with it as I've described. The reason we're not buying this is we can't buy anything at prices we're willing to pay. It's just that simple. Other people are bidding the price up. And a lot of the buying is not by people who really plan to own them. A lot of it is fee-driven buying. Private equity buys things so they can have more fees by having more things under management. Of course, it's a lot easier to buy something you use somebody else's money. We're using our own money, or at least that's the way we think of it. The shareholders who are worried about the future because it looks complicated and difficult and they're hazard, I want to say to them what my old torch professor said to me, Charlie. He'd say, Charlie, tell me what your problem is and I'll try and make it more difficult for you. And I'm just repeating his favor to you. When you're thinking the thoughts you're doing, at least you're thinking in the right direction. You're worried about the right things. All you people that are worried about the inflation and the future of the republic and so forth. Of course, in a modern democracy in the age of Keynes, you're going to get big government reaction. The reaction this time was bigger than it's ever been before in the history of the United States. They just threw money at the problem, and they were probably right to fear what was going to happen and to be quite liberal in throwing money at it. They threw so much money so fast that it's hard for the restaurants to get people to do the work. But I don't criticize it. It's hard to make these decisions under pressure. Well, you have to be optimistic about the competency of our technical civilization. But there again, it's an interesting thing. If you take the last 100 years, 1922 to 2022, most of modernity came in that 100 years. And in the previous 100 years, that got another big chunk of modernity. And before that, things were pretty much the same for the previous thousands of years. Life was pretty brutal and short and limited and what have you. No printing press, no air conditioning, no modern medicine, no. I don't think we're going to get things that were in what I call the real human needs. Think of what it meant to get, say, first you got the steam engine, the steamship, the railroad, and a little bit of improvement in farming and a little bit of improvement in plumbing. That's what you got the 100 years that ended in 1922. The next 100 years gave us widely distributed electricity, modern medicines, the automobile, the airplane, the records, the movies, the air conditioning. If you wanted 3 children, you had to have 6 because 3 died in infancy. That was our ancestors. Think of the agony of watching half your children die. It's amazing how much achievement there's been in civilization in these last 200 years, and most of it in the last 100 years. Now, the trouble with it is that the basic needs are pretty well filled. In the United States, the principal problem of the poor people is they're too fat. That is a very different place from what happened in the past. They were on the edge of starving. And what happens is, it's really interesting, is with all this enormous increase in living standards and freedom and diminishment of racial inequities and all the huge progress that has come, people are less happy about the state of affairs than they were when things were way tougher. And that has a very simple explanation. The world is not driven by greed, it's driven by envy. And the fact that everybody's 5 times better off than they used to be, they take it for granted. All they think about is somebody else having more now, and it's not fair that he should have it and they don't. That's the reason that God came down and told Moses that you couldn't envy your neighbor's wife or even his donkey. I mean, even the old Jews were having trouble with envy. And so it's built into the nature of things. It's weird for somebody my age because I was in the middle of the Great Depression when the hardship was unbelievable. I was safer walking around Omaha in the evening than I am in my own neighborhood in Los Angeles after all this great wealth and so forth. So, and I have no way of doing anything about it. I can't change the fact that a lot of people are very unhappy and feel very abused after everything's improved by about 600% because there's still somebody else who has more. Think of the pretentious expenditures of the rich. Who in the hell needs a Rolex watch so you can get mugged for it? You know, I mean, yet everybody wants to have a pretentious expenditure, and that helps drive demand in our modern capitalist society. My advice to the young people is don't go there. The hell with the pretentious expenditure. I don't think there's much happiness in it, but it does drive the civilization we actually have. It drives the dissatisfaction.
What's the best advice you have for individual investors to optimally deal with the negative impact of inflation other than owning quality equities?
Well, it may be that you have to choose the least bad of a bunch of options. That frequently happens in human decision making. And the Mungers have Berkshire stock, Costco stock, Chinese stocks through Lilu, a little bit of Daily Journal stock, and a bunch of apartments. I think the great lesson from the Mungers is you don't need all this damn diversification. You're lucky if you've got 4 good assets. I think the finance professors sell the idea that perfect diversification is professional investment. If you're trying to do better than average, you're lucky if you have 4 things to buy. And to ask for 20 is really asking for egg in your beer. It's very few people have enough brains to get 20 good investments. Most of my schooling was in the Great Depression, but that means I'm one of the very few people that's still alive who deeply remembers the Great Depression. And that's been very helpful to me. It was so extreme that people like you have just no idea what the hell it was like. It was really, there was just nobody had any money. The rich people didn't have any money. People would come and beg for a meal at the door, and we had a hobo jungle not very far from my grandfather's house. And I was safer in that hobo jungle in the depths of the 30s when people were starving practically than I am walking around my own neighborhood now in Los Angeles at night. The world has changed on that. You'd think the crime would be less, but crime was pretty low in those days. So at any rate, I had a very unusual bunch of experience to go through civilization in various phases, including the greatest recession. Well, I say it's one of the greatest recessions in 600 years in the English-speaking world. It was really something, and it was very interesting to watch, and also to watch it fixed. It was fixed by the accidental Keynesianism of World War II. Very interesting. And Hitler had fixed the Great Depression in Germany by the deliberate Keynesianism, but he wasn't doing it to stimulate the economy. He wanted to get even with all the people he hated, but he borrowed all this money and created all these armaments. And Hitler's Germany by 1939 was the strongest economic power in Europe, and nobody else was close. And you wouldn't understand that as well as I do if you hadn't lived through it. You just could see the place gaining traction. More and more and more and more, and pretty soon it was fixed. And in those days, there were all kinds of people, most of my family, for they believed in hard money based on gold and not much welfare and so on and so on. So that I was raised among fairly backward people by modern standards. But they were backward in kind of a self-reliant way that I think was helpful. I've never regretted that I wasn't raised in a more liberal establishment. I had a liberal aunt. She was my mother's cousin, but she was the second lady dean at the University of Chicago. And she'd done her thesis on the conditions in the coal mines. And of course she was a screaming leftist. I would be a screaming leftist if I observed the way the coal miners of yesteryear were treated. You couldn't be a human being with any decency in you without feeling that it was deeply improper to have the misery that great and have it manipulated for the benefit of the mine owners and so forth. But she sent me all these left-wing books, one every Christmas, and I always thought she was a little nuts. Which shows that if sometimes the very vivid extreme evidence misleads you on the deeper reality.